This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 110 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Now, you might notice if you're a regular listener that by accident I've had a special episode every 10 episodes the last couple of anniversaries. On episode 90, I celebrated 2 years of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast with a special episode interviewing me, and something similar in episode 100. So I've decided this can be an ongoing thing. Why not? So we're up to episode 110 today, and it's a special episode. I'm calling it 10 Thoughts I'm Thinking About Thoughtful Travel, because I have so many things to say. And I guess this is my chance. So here I'm going to say a bunch of things, but I have also got some really interesting thoughts from members of the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group as well. So we'll get on to them in a moment as well. But first of all, I have to preface my 10 thoughts by telling you they are really random and not in any particular order at all. And some of them are thoughts I've thought a lot, and some are kind of developing thoughts. So I just thought, it's a kind of a good chance to think about some of the things I'm finding important in this whole thoughtful travel space. So here we go. Here's my list. Number 1. I have noticed that thoughtful travel is a thing that more and more people are thinking about, whether it's specifically, for example, I was just at a conference in Bangkok and I met someone from World Expeditions, and they use the very phrase thoughtful travel in their website, and as have a small thoughtful travel magazine and stuff. It looks gorgeous, really interesting stuff. And so it's interesting to see more and more people thinking about exactly that phrase, thoughtful travel. And more in general are thinking about that kind of stuff. Maybe they call it mindful travel, or it runs into things like sustainable travel and other kind of good ways to think about travel, not just in a let's go and have fun way. So I'm really pleased to see that more and more people in all walks of life are thinking about this. So number 2, I think about this a lot because it annoys me when people don't. So I think not even if you want to be a thoughtful traveller, just if you're going to be any traveller, you should prepare for a trip. And I don't mean make a great packing list, because I sure don't, but I mean learning something about where you're going before you go there. Google is our friend. Everything is on there. If you want to know about kind of the cultural norms and the etiquette in a place, how you might offend someone and how you can avoid offending someone from another culture, then, Google will help you. Learning a little bit of the local language, it's easy to learn. Even if you're only learning hello, goodbye, please, thank you. It makes a big difference. Just last week, I was standing in Bangkok airport for, felt like hours, probably only an hour, but we're in a very, very long queue to get to the immigration queue. In fact, it was obviously I'd landed at the wrong time with a million other flights. And there was some airport staff kind of trying to get us into appropriate lines. And a youngish guy, probably, around 20 to 25, from, I think from his accent, from a European country, but I couldn't quite tell where, not a native speaker. But anyway, these Thai ground staff in the airport were speaking to us in English, and which was already, more than I would expect, but it's good, they can see we're all foreigners, and asking us to, move into this queue or whatever. But it was very chaotic, to be fair. But this guy yells at them in his accent, "Speak English. Nobody here speaks Thai." And I was flabbergasted. And for a start, they were speaking English. And yes, they have an accent just as he does. But anyway, nobody should demand that someone in another country speaks their language. I mean, we're a guest of their country. I just was really shocked that someone could react that way. And so loudly. And if he'd said something again, I think I would have had words, but fortunately his friend shushed him up and all was well. But those kind of things really bug me, so I really think everyone, whether you are really aiming to be a thoughtful traveller or not, you have a kind of a responsibility to be more prepared for a trip in that way. Okay, number 3, completely different again, but I've been reminded a lot this year that the more you travel, the more you learn about yourself. It's doesn't seem that any amount of travel can ever teach you everything about yourself. Every time I travel more, I learn something new. Every trip kind of changes me irreversibly. So, for example, this year I've been in Japan, back to my beloved Japan, and what I learnt there was that I miss it so much, and it made me kind of certain that sometime in the future I'll spend some extended period of time there again. Which reminded me I must kind of keep up my Japanese language skills. There's a good reason to do it. Then I was on the trip to Fiji, which made me realise I had been missing out really a lot by completely avoiding group travel. There are some definite pros of group travel, and that was an amazing trip. And then just last week in Thailand, I had a different kind of group travel and with new kinds of people. And they were travel writers of various kinds, and they really stretched my thinking about what I could do with my work. So that was very interesting for me. Certainly wouldn't have happened if I had stayed home. So I guess what I'm trying to say is what you learn about yourself is not necessarily about the country you're in. Often it is, but not always. It's just that fact that you are out of your normal routine and doing something different, and that kind of manages to get your brain ticking and you learn something new about yourself, which I think is awesome. Okay, number 4. I have learnt recently and been thinking about my grandiose idea that if we all travel more, we could bring about world peace. I always think it sounds like a pie in the sky idea, but I just think if everyone got to know people from lots of different backgrounds, then it would be much harder for them to, for example, make policies that discriminate against those people, because then they are real people. Anyway, I discovered recently that there is an International Institute for Peace Through Tourism, and they have a really interesting credo of the peaceful traveller, and I'll link to that in the show notes. And I was just glad that I'm not the only one who thinks that this is a possibility. Okay, number 5 of my thoughts I'm thinking about thoughtful travel. So I was in Bangkok last week, and this is kind of a thing that's happened to me all over the place, but I'm always, shocked is not the word anymore for sure, but confused when I visit countries where there's such a range of wealth. So there's people living in absolute destitute poverty up to people living, very rich, elaborate, wealthy lifestyles. Now, here in Australia, of course, we have both extremes, but it's not quite so... It's certainly not so spread out, and there's a lot of, kind of average, normal, middle-class people, and it always, this is one of those, half-formed thoughts, I suppose. This bothers me. I don't have any answers, but it's something I notice. Okay, number 6. I am always learning about how to be a more thoughtful traveller. So, for example, the topic of elephants came up because we were in Thailand, and it's something that I remember learning, I don't know how long ago, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I hadn't given it much thought before then. And I posted that I was going on a trip, I think it was to Bali. And a friend of mine replied just with a gentle thing saying something like, please don't ride any elephants. I wasn't really intending to either, but I didn't really know much about it. And going on from that, I actually had a friend who worked at the Elephant Nature Park in Thailand, and I've learnt so much more about how basically any elephants in captivity are treated awfully. To be able to be kept in captivity, they're treated extraordinarily badly, very cruelly. So that whole, let's look after the elephants thing is something that, I feel quite passionate about after learning all of that. And some people still haven't heard about that. And that's okay, as long as when someone gives them a nudge and mentions it, that they go and do some research or watch some videos and learn something about it. I think it's important to have that kind of mindset of always learning. Another similar example is, it's more than 20 years ago that I first visited Uluru or Ayers Rock in the middle of Australia. And back then, most people would climb the rock. I remember finding a relatively small sign in a relatively out-of-the-way place explaining that the local Aboriginal people didn't like it when people climbed the rock. It's a sacred place, it's quite dangerous, and people would often die or be injured there, and so on. And I chose not to climb the rock, but certainly, probably 3/4 of the people around me did climb. But now it's being closed down imminently so that people can't climb, and certainly the climbing numbers have declined rapidly over the years as more and more people became aware of this. So keep learning, I guess, is what I think a good thoughtful traveller does. All right, number 7. And this one's about kids. So I think it's a parent's job to teach your kids how to be thoughtful travellers. This came into my mind because at this conference in Bangkok, there was a talk about, it was connected with the elephant tourism stuff, and it said that a number of people who ride elephants were kind of on the fence about doing it, but then their kids said, I really, really want to ride the elephant, Mum. And so they said, okay, we'll do it. Whereas to me, I was like, no, this is like the absolute time when you need to be a good role model to your kids and don't give in to demands, and teach your kids why it's not an ethical or appropriate thing to do to ride an elephant. Like kids are demanding all the time, but I would rather say to my son, yes, okay, you can have that chocolate bar, than yes, okay, you can ride an elephant. So the chocolate bar is probably not very good for him either, but better than the riding of an elephant for the elephant. So I think as a parent, we have a really important job to teach our kids how to be good global citizens. And of course that starts with learning things ourselves as well. All right, number 8 on my list of thoughts I'm thinking is about the people you meet and the people you travel with. So I often, well, not often, but now and again, I get a bit sad because I think of all these special people I've met, and they're spread so widely around the world that it's impossible for me to ever have them all in the same room. So this is my kind of dream. Wouldn't it be awesome? Even just Thoughtful Travel podcast listeners, I would love to have you all in the same room. It would be such an amazing party. But having been on another group trip in northern Thailand this past week, it was so wonderful to be in a group of like-minded people who had lots of interesting experiences to share. And when you're traveling, it's quite a bonding experience. You go through different experiences together that, nobody else has had with you. And it's just, I don't know. It's a special way to make friends and meet new people. And I think that's a really lovely part of travel that I certainly really appreciate. Okay, number 9 on my list is that we can also do thoughtful traveling at home. So that's kind of things like, eating in locally owned restaurants and cafes rather than in big chains, so you can support local people and help that kind of, help the community develop. Do sightseeing in your own city and think about how your hometown or where you're living, how it fits into the bigger world. And kind of connected to that is, and certainly in Australia and in many parts of the world, Indigenous cultures have been kind of crushed by modern culture a lot, and I think it's important to find ways to support them. So that's, something you can do even when you're not traveling, I guess. Okay, number 10 is very simple. I want to do more traveling. It's there's never enough. Traveling is so enriching and inspiring to me, and it changes me constantly, and I want to keep doing it, basically. So I'm sure lots of you feel the same. Anyway, that is my kind of 10 thoughts I'm thinking about thoughtful travel. And I opened up to the Facebook group, the Thoughtful Travellers group, to tell me some of the things you're thinking about at the moment in the thoughtful travel area. And I just want to highlight a few of them because there were some really interesting topics that were brought up and things that I think it's good for us to think about. So Luke, who lives in Sumatra, has said he's been thinking more and more about tourism leakage, so avoiding kind of the big booking platforms as much as possible and making the extra effort to book directly with like local operators, family-run guest houses, things where you can know that your money is going directly and wholly into the local economy, not, 10% going to some big mega website and another 10% going somewhere else and so on. And I really enjoy that idea. It's sometimes hard to do because it takes more research, but I think wherever it's possible, I think it's a really fabulous idea and definitely worth the extra effort, I think. I think you'll also probably find that you make some, more special connections that way. So I really like that suggestion from Luke. Jean mentioned being more sustainable wherever we can. And this is kind of an ongoing theme in our thoughtful travel thinking, because Kristen then said she'd been thinking a lot about reducing waste when she travels. So, for example, when she's been flying and seeing all the rubbish created just by flying, she said it's a big cause of guilt, and she's been trying to figure out how others reduce their waste while traveling and trying to figure out how to make airlines think that it's an important topic. For example, the use of like low quality disposable headphones on flights instead of the reusable ones, and all of the wasted food that gets thrown out. And this kind of reducing waste would be a big step. So it's again one of those big problems we don't have the answer to, but we've been trying. It's at least if we're thinking about it, we can we can make some steps towards it. Now, Anne had a really interesting thought that she was thinking, and she said she'd been thinking about how, as an introvert, she can connect more with local people. So obviously she'd been finding it hard to kind of, I assume, kind of get the confidence to chat to people, or finding ways to kind of really get connected to local people. And we talked about that she always tries to learn a few basic words. She said she's currently struggling with Polish, and I completely understand. Polish is one of those languages that has crazy pronunciation, but I like it. It's just hard. And I also suggested something like finding classes that they offer, like a cooking class or a local craft or something, could be a good way to get to kind of chat to local people. Just a few days ago, in fact, I was in Nan in northeastern Thailand, and I sat with this gorgeous lady who was showing me how to fold banana leaves to make the kind of the decorative holder for flowers that you would use for an offering at the temple. And it was just lovely to sit with her and have her help me, because it was quite tricky, and just to chat. It was, just a really special kind of moment. So anyway, if anyone else has some good suggestions for introverts to kind of connect with local people, that would be awesome. Julie also mentioned making a difference. I think a lot of people in the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group definitely are wanting to make a difference. For example, she had a trip to Uluru, and by finding out what might help that region, she was able to get some donations and take some books and warm clothes and school supplies up to some of the kids at Uluru. And I think that finding out, and definitely finding out first what is useful and what is effective. For example, when we went to Fiji recently and we knew we'd be meeting some of the kids, the organisers from Hands on Journeys specifically said, don't bring gifts, don't bring sweets or chocolates. This is not a helpful, sustainable thing, but do bring clothes. Clothing donations are very welcomed and very useful, and so that's what we took. Now, Joanne came up with the topic of ethical travel. She said she'd been listening to a panel discussion about ethical travel this week, and the elephant issue came up again. I completely agree. And she was talking about even some of the sanctuaries where the volunteers can feed and wash the elephants, and that even that can be harmful to the elephant. And I said, I mentioned there, I would say more in the episode. So I had a friend on the trip last week who had just been up to Elephant Nature Park, and we were chatting about it. And she said that there's kind of lots of kind of phasing out programs in place. So many of the elephants were, very domesticated and used in lots of different kind of situations, and are very accustomed to human touch and lots of things like this. But each kind of step of the way, they're phasing out. So at the moment, I think I'm not quite sure of the details now, but they have perhaps phased out bathing near the elephants, and they phased out feeding most of them, or something like this. But over time, they have kind of a plan to phase out all of this, not usual human interaction until there's basically nearly none, and it's just a lovely kind of retirement village for elephants who don't need to really interact with humans. But that's a very quick summary of it. But it's a hard, these elephants have spent decades living amongst humans, and it's not, they're not kind of living in a natural way anymore either. So anyway, big topic. We probably need to do a whole elephant episode one day. But I will actually leave a link in the show notes to when I chatted to Diane, who had worked at Elephant Nature Park. And there's an episode where she talks about some of the cruel practices and stuff. So I'll leave a link in the show notes to that. Joanne also mentioned about avoiding orphanages where often it's the case that the children aren't really orphans. So you think you're going along to help out some poor kids, but often it's a bit of a money-making scam because you see the kids and you donate money, but where does that money go? That is the question. So very tricky kind of option there. And I also heard from Layla, who said she'd been thinking about the power we have as travellers and using that power wisely so that we can actually have an impact on policies and human rights. So, for example, actively avoiding businesses that mistreat their workers or abuse animals and so on. And it's a big issue and tricky to do right, I think, especially so as Layla mentioned, speaking up about regimes that do evil. Although she mentions, after your return probably is a better time to do it, not while you're in that country. But I think that that's a really useful way. As travellers, we can educate the people who know us about what we've learnt in those kind of places where sometimes the media isn't exactly clear about what's really going on. And I also heard a really good, had a great topic mentioned by Kim, who said she's been thinking about that balance between wanting to see everything when she travels and actually being able to experience the place that she's visiting. So that whole slow travel idea, and a couple of us agreed, it's really hard. I always want to be a slow traveller and I strive to do it, but it's very easy to get caught up in that idea of seeing everything because we fear maybe this is our only chance. Now, I know from all my experiences that it's much better to just see a couple of things and really see them thoroughly and enjoy them than to rush around and see 10 things. But it's still really hard sometimes to avoid. We live in a real kind of checklist society, and it's really hard to do that and hard to stick to your sort of slow traveller guns. But it's really worth it, I think. Mary had a really good suggestion. Mary said that when she's planning their trips, they often plan to have nothing on the last day or so that there's time to catch up on things that she's missed or just to wander the area, a bit more and so on. So planning nothing days is a really good idea. I think I've done that certainly when we were in Japan earlier this year. We did that and it was wonderful. Some of those nothing days turned out to be days where we would go to the 100 yen shop, or we'd go out to have some amazing food and just stroll the streets and just feel, what it's like to be in Osaka or Kyoto. So it was lovely. And a final thought that I had was another one from Mary about what she described as the Airbnb effect. And it's really tricky. So she said, and I agree, part of the reason that she stays in Airbnbs or similar accommodation is to stay among the locals. But in some places, the proliferation of Airbnbs has meant, they're outpricing the locals so that they can't live there anymore and that it's mostly just tourists. So this is really tricky and such a shame. And I don't know what to do about it either. I know in Japan they've just changed the laws so that now people who rent their property as an Airbnb can only do it for a part of the year. I think it's half the year. I can't quite remember, which has sort of changed things a lot. And there's been incidents where there's kind of, mean signs everywhere saying no Airbnb people here and stuff. So, I think also locals don't necessarily want a lot of Airbnb apartments around them. So it's a real shame because I love the concept. I've stayed in Airbnbs so much because I love being able to be staying where the locals live. But it comes with its own problems, as many things do, and is something we will have to try and work out a bit more in the coming years. So that was the great thoughts that the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group gang came up with. I really appreciate all your chat in there. It's a really good example of all of the great things that we talk about. And so I hope that this episode about the thoughts that I and the group are thinking about thoughtful travel gives you some food for thought. Maybe you've learnt something, or maybe you've got some ideas and you'd like to extend on what we've talked about. if you would please come along to the Facebook group. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and I should be able to add you as soon as you ask to join. There's also a link in the show notes if you need. I'll also add any links that I've talked about along the way, and you can find the show notes at notaballerina.com/110 for this episode. And I look forward to having some future special episodes. So in another 10 episodes, we'll get to episode 120, and I'm sure we'll have some discussion in the Facebook group about what we should do for a special episode that time. Now, I have just come back from a trip, and I have another trip to Cambodia and Vietnam coming up in just a couple of weeks. It's a kind of a crazy time of year. So I have to tell you that I am actually having a few weeks break from the podcast. So this is being recorded in August, and I will be back towards the end of September. I apologise, but there are 109 other episodes in the back catalogue that you can go away and listen to if you haven't listened to all of them. So I apologise for that. I usually have a break around July, but this is a funny thing. I was so busy I forgot to have a break. Doesn't make any sense, does it? But I was just pumping out the episodes and I forgot that I usually have that break in the northern summer. So a little break now instead. I look forward to talking to you again soon though. Thanks so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.